In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Runchat's Code Node to produce apps that you can run directly inside of Runchat. I'm going to show you how to create a simple boid algorithm, and then also I'm going to show you how to do the same in both Rhino and Blender, depending on your workflow. You can see that this is an interactive app that's been made with Runchat, and here's how you get started. So this example will be in the description. And you can see that I've given you a prompt to start from. To get started, we're going to create a code node. So to do that, I double click on the canvas, I type code, and I can create this node here. I'm going to grab this node and resize it using the bottom right corner. And you can see there's a few options up the top for different preview options. I'm going to use both, which will show us both code and also the chat, which we'll use to talk to an agent and ask it to make the code we want. In the bottom here, you'll need to ensure that you've set your output to HTML. And also for this, we're going to try using Claude Haiku 4.5 because it's a cheap model. It should be able to do this type of thing. And if there's issues, we can always use better models to help us. Otherwise, if we want to do things that are really complicated, it might just be better off using a better model. An example would be using Gemini or using Opus. So I'm going to grab my prompt here and copy it, and I'm going to paste it into the chat. If I hit send message, this button here, not to be confused with this play button here, if I hit send message, the agent will get started on making my boid algorithm based on the requirements I've specified in this prompt. I'll let this run for a moment. Okay, so it's produced some HTML, which includes some JavaScript for the algorithm. And I think this is going to be pretty safe to run, so I'm going to hit play at the bottom here. This flips the node to the output. So there's the input, which is the code, and the output, which is the app. And you'll notice that there's this header here that asks us to enable scripts in order for this application to run. So I'm going to click enable scripts. Oh, I didn't write myself, but the agent wrote for me based on a prompt that I made. And okay, you can see we've got an error that's come up. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to let the agent know that there's an error. And like I said before, we might use a better model for this. I'm going to switch to Gemini Flash for this. It's made some improvements and we can hit the play button here. And now enable scripts. Fantastic. So we have an agent script with not much work, just a little bit of prompting inside of the chat. And we needed to troubleshoot some errors, but I'm pretty happy with this. So we have a lot of control. We can add a bunch more boids. It's relatively performant inside of the browser. And so you could imagine that you could start to do things like add trails, export geometry, and you should be able to do all of that by just chatting with the agent and adding those features. So that's how we do this inside of Runchat. But if you're looking for stronger design outcomes and interoperability with design software you're already using, we offer a few different options. I'm going to go to Blender for a moment, but I will follow up with Rhino afterwards if you want to skip to later in the video. Okay, I have a simulation running in the left here. This is one I made earlier, and I'm going to tell you how I did it. And if you're interested in pursuing this method, you can also pursue it yourself, and I'll include an example afterwards. But basically, you need to install the Runchat for Blender plugin. If you hit N in Blender, once you've installed it, you'll see Runchat appear here, and you can open it by selecting Open Runchat. It'll open a companion window, and then inside of that, you can obviously sign in and create code nodes. The cool thing about writing code for Blender is that you have an option here to output Blender Python. And so using the agents, when you chat now inside of the code node, it'll output Python that can be executed inside of Blender. And that's how I made this script. So if you hit run in Blender, it'll run this script in Blender. And if you hit the space bar, it runs the simulation. So if I go back to the start here and hit play, it starts again. The cool thing is as well, the capability is enabled for the code node to make code that produces its own end panels and gives you sliders and buttons. So you can ask it to add customizable options directly in the end panel. So I added this boids button, And you see we have a number of sliders. So I can add a bunch of additional boids. I'll add 200. I'll add a longer trail length, reset everything. And then if I hit space to play, you can see the behavior of these boids. So that's how you would go about this inside of Blender. And I'll move to Rhino. So in Rhino, it's very similar to what we just did in Blender. This example I do have ready. So you can select Rhino Python here. That will enable the ability to run inside of Rhino instead of running the code node. I've gone back and forth chatting a few times with my requirements, and it's produced this code. And I can hit this run in Rhino button, which will pass the code over and then ask me a few questions. So it's asking me for the number of boids. I'm going to say 100, the bounding box size, trail size, let's say 50. It's 3D. And it should start running the simulation. Great. So we can see our boids in Rhino. And the cool thing about the code that I wrote for this, or the agent wrote for this, is if I hit escape, it'll ask me if I'd like to keep the geometry. So it'll write this geometry to the Rhino viewport. And so you can give it layers and work with it. You could imagine that there's an improvement we could make where it tries to navigate meshes. So we can also put a mesh in here. And so we'll do this as an improvement right now. So the improvement I want to make is, I'm just going to do something silly, like put in a mesh cone. And then I'm going to ask the agent, I'm using Opus for this because I think this is a bit more complicated and I'd like it to work. I'm going to ask it to add the ability to add an input mesh when I run the script, and then use that mesh as an attractor for the agent. So they'll be kind of drawn to it and start to navigate around it. Cool, so it's added that ability and I can hit play. Now it'll ask me for the number of boids, 100. And then it's asking me for a mesh attractor, and I should be able to select a mesh and then the sudden attraction strength. And so you can see now that they're attracted to this mesh and trying to like orbit around it. Again, when I finish this, I press escape and then I can choose to save this geometry. So I'm going to click yes in this case, and you can see now I can select all the trails for these agents and use those in my designs. Another thing worth mentioning is that if my code didn't work inside of Rhino, there is a button that you can press where basically it'll take the console output or the error from Rhino and it'll open it inside of the chat. So if you encounter any issues, I do recommend pressing this button. It'll send it to the agent and the agent can start working on the fix. Makes it very easy to troubleshoot issues that you're having just by to get the script running inside of the Rhino viewport. I'll leave it at that. I'm going to include some examples in the descriptions and hopefully add these to the examples page in Runchat. Let us know on Discord if you're having any problems, and cheers.